I'm about to walk you through something that a lot of people will not want to hear. And the deeper I went into this research, the darker it gets. So get ready. Everything I'm about to say is historically documented. This is not a conspiracy theory, and it's not even my opinion. This is actual history about how the Republican Party turned the Christian community into the most loyal voter base in American politics. Not through shared fate, but through calculated political strategy. And where it started will surprise you. See, before we get into the strategy, you need to understand where things started. In the 1970s, evangelical Christians were not guaranteed Republican votes. In fact, most of them leaned Democrat. Jimmy Carter actually won the presidency in 1976 largely because of the evangelical support. He was a born again Southern Baptist who taught Sunday school and openly talked about his faith. So the idea that Christians have always been Republican is not true at all. That alliance was built, and the people who built it had a very specific reason for doing so. Now, let me say what got me looking even into any of this was I was wondering, how did abortion become such a dominant political topic that people will base their entire vote on? So I started doing research, and what I found was that the Republican Party latched onto abortion actually as a political strategy. See, the wealthy who were behind the party could not win the popular vote on their own because their policies worked against everyday Americans. They needed a cause, though, that would create that loyalty that they were looking for. And they found it with abortion. I know that sounds crazy, but then I kept digging, and the story goes back even further. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Historians have actually documented that the real catalyst on winning over the Christian vote was something else entirely: segregation. After the Supreme Court's Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954, which desegregated public schools, hundreds of private all-white Christian academies popped up all across the South. These were called segregation academies. So you have to think the people that's behind this whole movement in this Republican Party are people who were wanting segregation. Now, how Christian is that? Continuing on, though, Jerry Falwell himself opened one in 1967 called the Lynchburg Christian Academy. A local newspaper at the time described it as a private school for white students. Then in the early 1970s, the IRS ruled that racially discriminatory private schools were no longer eligible for tax-exempt status. This directly impacted schools like Bob Jones University, which had never accepted Black applicants, and many of these Christian academies. This is what mobilized evangelical leaders politically. I know this is sick, and it makes you wonder, why weren't we taught any of this in school? See, this was not even about abortion. A conservative political operative named Paul Weyrich, who co-founded the Heritage Foundation, later admitted this himself. He said he tried to get evangelical leaders interested in other political issues and utterly failed. Now, once the evangelical vote was locked in, the pattern became clear. Ronald Reagan told Christian leaders in 1980, quote unquote, "I know you can't endorse me, but I want you to know that I endorse you." That line delivered him 2/3 of the white evangelical vote. But as president, Ronald Reagan never supported a constitutional amendment to ban abortion, which is what the movement was demanding. He had actually signed one of the most liberal abortion laws in the country as governor of California. So he talked the talk, but legislatively was not moving anything. And every Republican administration after him did the same exact thing. George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, all courted the evangelical vote. George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, all of them courted the evangelical vote made the promises, and governed for corporate interests. Historians call it institutional capture. The preferences of evangelical voters were promoted during campaigns, but rarely gained traction once candidates took office. Republicans knew that maintaining the rhetoric was more important than delivering results, because where were evangelicals going to go? And here is what really sealed it for me. It is not just abortion where the contradiction shows. If you actually read the teachings of Jesus and then what you look at what the Republican Party consistently pushes for, they are in direct conflict almost on every issue. Jesus said, heal the sick. Republican leaders have repeatedly fought to cut Medicaid, appeal the Affordable Care Act, and strip healthcare access from millions of low-income Americans. One Republican congressman even quoted Jesus saying, the poor will always be with us, as a reason to justify cutting health care for people who need it. Jesus said, care for the poor and the vulnerable. The Republican platform has consistently pushed to cut food stamps, reduce welfare programs, and slash social safety nets while simultaneously passing tax cuts that overwhelmingly benefit the wealthiest Americans. Jesus literally said it was easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And this is the party that prioritizes billionaire tax breaks. Jesus said, welcome the stranger. The Republican Party has built its modern identity around anti-immigration policy, family separations at the border, and demonizing people seeking refuge. Jesus said, do not judge, yet the party has consistently used legislation to target and restrict the rights of communities they disagree with on moral grounds. And here's the part that really stands out. Jesus never once mentioned abortion in the entire New Testament, not once, yet it became the single biggest political tool the Republican Party ever used to lock in the Christian vote. Meanwhile, the things Jesus actually did talk about, caring for the poor, healing the sick, welcoming the foreigner, warning against the love of money, those are the exact areas where Republican policy goes in the opposite direction. The strategy was always the same: campaign on their values, win their vote, govern for corporate interests, and then repeat. And then came Donald Trump, a man who has been married 3 times, who has been found liable for sexual abuse in civil court, who has been accused of ties to child sex trafficking through Jeffrey Epstein, and who was convicted of 34 felonies related to falsifying business records. And 8 out of 10 white evangelical voters supported him. That is the proof that this was never about faith. If it were about faith, a man whose personal life contradicts nearly every value the Christian community claims to stand for would never have received that level of support. But he did, because the alliance between Republicans and Christians was never built on shared belief. It was built on political strategy. And look what this administration is actually doing. They tried to shut down the CFPB, the only federal agency that has returned over $21 billion to everyday Americans who were scammed by banks and predatory lenders. They dropped $3.5 billion in enforcement cases against financial institutions that were cheating consumers. They killed rules that would have saved you $15 billion a year in junk fees on credit cards and overdrafts. And Trump has pardoned over 70 convicted fraudsters, including a man who ran a $1.3 billion Medicare scam. That is not governing for the people, that is governing for the corporations and the wealthy donors who fund the campaigns. And yet the Christian base stays loyal because the strategy works. It was never about faith, it was about votes. And now it is evolving into something even more dangerous. There are people inside this administration who are not just using Christianity as a political tool, they're actively working to turn the United States into a Christian nationalist state. Russell Vought, who is Trump's director of the Office of Management and Budget in the White House, is a self-described Christian nationalist. He was caught on undercover video saying he wants to make sure that Americans can say that we are a Christian nation. He was one of the architects of Project 2025. And he has said he wants federal bureaucrats, meaning The everyday government workers who process your tax returns, manage social security, inspect food safety, and enforce consumer protections to be traumatically affected and to wake up every morning not wanting to go to work. He authored the sections of Project 2025 that call for expanding presidential power over every federal agency, dismantling protections for emergency abortion care, and expanding federal surveillance of pregnant Americans. This is the same man who was put in charge of the CFPB, the agency that protects you from being scammed by banks. And what did he do? He's trying to shut it down. Then there is Leonard Leo. He is the man behind the conservative takeover of the Supreme Court. Through the Federalist Society and a massive dark money network, Leo helped select 5 of the 6 conservative Supreme Court judges. A former aide described his strategy plainly. Conservatives had lost the culture war on abortion, gay rights, and contraception. So they needed to stack the courts because they could not if public opinion prevailed. Leo has funneled hundreds of millions of dollars in anonymous dark money to reshape the courts, and his network's crowning achievement was the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe versus Wade. These are not people operating on the fringes. These are people who are inside of the administration, our government, and they are reshaping the courts, reshaping this country, and they are using the Christian label to justify consolidating power in ways that have nothing to do with the teachings of Jesus. And look, I know this video is going to upset people. I know that. I have people in my life who are Christians, people I love and respect deeply. And this is not an attack on their faith. It is not an attack on anyone's faith. But I care about those people and people who are out there too much to stay silent about a political system that has been taking advantage of what you believe in and what they believe in for almost 50 years. I am not anti-Christian. I'm not anti-faith. But what I am against is manipulation. And that is exactly what the Republican Party has done to the Christian community. It has been one of the most effective political manipulations in American history. And the real origin was segregation. The public story became abortion, and the votes were secured. The promises were rarely delivered, and the loyalty never wavered. So I want to leave you with this question. If the party that claims to represent your faith consistently governs against the very things Jesus taught, at what point do you stop and ask yourself whether you are following your faith or following a political strategy that was designed to use it? That is not an attack. That is a sincere question for you to think about. And I think it is one that more people need to sit with. If this video made you think, drop a comment, share it with someone you think needs to hear it. And if you disagree, I welcome that too. Just bring the facts, because everything I shared in this video is historically documented. And if you'd like to stay in the know and just like to stay educated with things, make sure you give me a follow or hit that subscribe button, whatever you see on your screen.